Joining us is Britt Gillette, who's an author whose books include Signs of the Second Coming, Racing Toward Armageddon, Why Advanced Technology Signals the End Times, and The End Times, A Guide to Bible Prophecy in the Last Days, among other books. His online home is his Substack at brittgillette.substack.com, which is linked in the description, where he produces analysis daily. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Britt.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I've been perusing some of your books this week, and I think we're both on the same frequency, more or less. And so I've been following your Substack. I very much enjoy the takes that you do. You do brief videos, 20, 30 minutes. You've also got a paid option there as well. And before just getting your thoughts on the matters of the day, anything you want to tell us about yourself? You've got a long history writing in the Christian sphere.
Yeah, so I've been writing online for probably 25 years at this point, been studying Bible prophecy and international politics for about 30 of those years. So, that's my background. Started writing online with articles, then I've written 4 books, and now I have a Substack.
And you participate as well with, I think the Prophecy Monthly Roundtable, which I enjoy viewing as well, which includes Patrick Wood, who's been on the podcast, and a few other folks. So I guess, starting out, getting your sort of download, as I like to say, my guests download on what's happening around the world. And I like to focus a lot, the term geopolitics and empire, globalism, world government, technocracy, sort of the big picture items that for me explain everything else that is going on. And the end game for me, I view is the totalitarian world state. So that's my biggest fascination. It's, people call it the New World Order, the Great Reset. And so, thoughts on that to start there, and as well as what are some of the core themes you explore, and what do you see that's happening in the world?
Sure. Well, I think that's where we're headed. We're headed toward globalism. We're headed toward global empire for a number of reasons, including the technology and the advance of technology that we see, whether it's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or molecular manufacturing, which isn't on the radar of a lot of people. That won't really become, once it becomes reality, we'll have global empire. We can talk about that in a little while. But I think also we're seeing what has been the global empire for our lifetimes, the United States of America, where I live. We're seeing them lose hold of that dominance militarily and financially on the world stage. I think that's probably the big event that's happening right now that we see. So we see anywhere from, I like to point out that in the 19th century, the British Empire ruled the seas. The Royal Navy was all over the earth. They had colonies all over the world. They had the world's reserve currency was the British pound. The financial center of the world was London. And the British Navy, Royal Navy, opened up the world's waterways and made them freely navigable for world trade. And that was a symbiotic relationship that they had financially and militarily, where their military was supported by their financial dominance, and their military dominance supported their financial dominance. And then the aftermath of World War I, we saw that power waning for a number of years, and the baton passed to the United States. And we saw the dollar become the world's global reserve currency, and the International Center of Finance moved from London to New York. And we saw it was the United States Navy that was projecting power around the globe, opening up the world's waterways for freely navigable trade. And essentially, this financial dominance allowed the United States to project its military power around the globe. And again, a symbiotic relationship where the US's financial dominance helped give it military dominance and vice versa. But we're seeing big cracks in that, especially in the last several years. Most notably, we have, as of a year ago, December, we had Operation Prosperity Guardian to open up the Red Sea and make it freely navigable for trade. That has been an abject failure. And from the moment it started, I pointed out it would be a failure because U.S. conventional military power is now obsolete. We see we're in the era of drone warfare now. It's a very early part, the initial phases of the drone era of warfare, but we see on the battlefield in Russia, Ukraine, it's a battlefield dominated by drones. And these drones are only going to become more sophisticated, more powerful, more plentiful. They're going to be onboarded with more AI and more sophisticated AI to where they can operate as decentralized swarms at much greater scale than we see today. And so conventional capabilities, these post-World War II conventional military capabilities, simply can't keep up with that. And so we see this in the Red Sea, where $1-2 million missiles are being used to shoot down $2,000 to $40,000 drones. And again, the drones are only going to get more sophisticated. They're going to rapidly develop and advance in just the months ahead, if not the days ahead. And yet that conventional hardware can't keep up. So we're seeing the US losing control of those freely navigable waterways, which is the primary role for the US Navy outside of simply defending the borders of the United States. So that's a big sign of problems we've seen since the early 1970s, where the OPEC nations had agreed to only trade oil for dollars. And we've seen that go by the wayside as well. And then most recently, we've seen the Trump tariffs come out. And I think there's a much bigger story there that many people aren't covering, which is that these tariffs and the intent of the Trump administration is to reshore, onshore domestic manufacturing. But to do so, it's a feature of the system of having the world's global reserve currency that you're going to run trade deficits with the other nations of the world. So if the Trump administration is taking a policy, we're going to eliminate those. Well, then they're also taking a policy that the United States will no longer have that global reserve currency. And that's a major restructuring of the post-World War II global financial and military order that I think a lot of people are missing because they're focused on the markets in the near term and what they're doing or what the impact is on the economy. But it's a much bigger deal because the United States isn't in that role. Who is? And so we're heading into a period of great volatility, in my opinion.
So there's so many things there, and I want to get to each of them, including the drone warfare. Again, I've very much enjoyed both your written pieces, which you've published on this drone future warfare, as well as the videos where you comment on a lot of this stuff. And maybe just to go back again to the world of government, so we can treat that topic and then move on from there. But I was going to ask you this later in the interview, but why don't we just treat it now? Where again, the Bible in a number of places, Book of Daniel, which you talk about a lot in your books as well, Book of Revelation implies that we're going to progressively move towards this centralization of power on the planet, and it's implied that it's going to be totalitarian. I don't believe it's going to last very long. And in my past conversations with Patrick Wood and Canadian pastor Arthur Pawlowski, I think we all kind of agreed, including Alex Thompson of UK Column, he's former GCA HQ officer and also a Christian, that this has come sort of in waves, where you had the Roman Empire build up, try to take as much of the world as it could. It collapses, and then it comes back. Holy Roman Empire collapses, and then the British Empire, even bigger and badder, and then it collapses, and then the American Empire, bigger and badder. So each successive time, it gets closer to the final, I guess, manifestation, which will be, I think, a world empire that will control the planet. And you've spoken about a new Pax Romana, 10 nation alliance or 10 kingdoms, something I don't have a solid thesis, but I have just multiple options where, we see the EU is the blueprint or model, and there's been maps created of 10 sort of supranational regional EU-like superstates, perhaps connected to the global UN Bretton Woods system. And also I feel in some ways Rome never disappeared. I think, Rome just moved from Italy, Europe to, you had the Holy Roman Empire, then it moves on to England, to Britain, and then to America, and now back to Europe. But it still seems like it's still linked to America and England. And so just what's sort of your view on what this is going to look like, this world state?
Sure. Well, as you said, the books of Daniel and the books of Revelation, or the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, talk about these 10 kings and a revived Roman Empire. So I expect to see that happen. Exactly what form it takes, I don't know. It could be these 10 regions, as you talked about, or it could be something as simple as, there used to be an alliance of nations within the EU now called the Western European Union that was 10 nations, and they actually called themselves the 10. And then they just sort of got absorbed by the European Union, and supposedly it no longer exists. Who knows? But let's imagine for a moment that there's a research project similar to the Manhattan Project involving 10 of these nations and the 10 kings. And they develop these advanced technologies, most primarily molecular manufacturing, I believe is the key technology in all of these, but artificial intelligence, quantum computing, swarm technologies we see are critical to all of this. But they would not only have the ability to conquer the world with that, but I believe they won't have any other option, because one of the things that the book of Revelation discusses that the world simply dismisses, or hasn't for much of my lifetime, is the idea that World War III is winnable. And in Revelation chapter 6, we read about a global war. And at the end of that, humanity still exists. And so there's a famous quote Albert Einstein said, I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And so the conventional wisdom is that due to mutual assured destruction, which has kept the major superpowers from direct conflict since World War II, that there won't be a World War III, because to do so would obliterate humanity. But the Bible tells us otherwise, and when we look at these advancing technologies, that tells us otherwise too, because mutual assured destruction and nuclear weapons, at least conventional nuclear weapons, are technologies that are becoming obsolete. And so as these technologies advance, and as mutual assured destruction becomes obsolete, then you have the scenario where you have a leading power who has emerged as the first mover in advancing these technologies. And they don't have the option of allowing a second competing power to emerge, because especially with exponentially advancing technology, that would be very volatile. You wouldn't be able to necessarily track the capabilities of your adversary in a way that you could be assured that they aren't going to strike you first. So my theory, and I believe that it's a very firm one, is that whoever achieves that breakthrough, that first mover advantage, will act on it to conquer the entire globe in order to prevent that second power from emerging. Whether their intentions are good or bad, it doesn't matter what their motivations are. They're going to look at what is the prospect of allowing the second power to emerge. We can't have that happen. And so to me, we're on a technological timeline that tells us whenever we reach that point, and I don't know where it is, I believe it's in our lifetime. I don't know if it's next week or 4 years from now or when it will be. But when we reach that point, the world will wake up to a conquered globe, similar to the way, think in the 1930s, there were people having conversations just like we're having about the prospect of an atomic bomb. The general public wasn't having that conversation, but the other people were. It was an open secret. And then the general public found out when they opened up the newspapers one day and found out that the atomic bomb had been used. And so I think the same thing is going to happen with molecular manufacturing, that one day the world will wake up and realize this exists and it was just used to conquer the globe. So I think global empire is inevitable for that reason. And also, as a Bible-believing Christian, I believe it's also inevitable because that's what the Bible tells us is going to happen, and the two things align perfectly.
And any thought on who do you think would come at the helm? When we talk about China or Russia or the EU or the United States. Many years ago, I remember reading. The Bible speaks of 200 million soldiers. John sees and I found a U.S. government assessment of if Washington went to war with Beijing, how many men could China raise up, manpower, 200 million. This U.S. military report said, and so just thoughts on who do you think would be at the helm, or would everyone sort of just come together? I constantly read Chinese government reports. Every week they're talking about. They say we're down with world government. We're down with the SDGs, Agenda 2030, all this stuff. We just want a fair and equitable sort of seat at the table, says China and Russia alongside the US and Europe. So who do you think might be at the helm?
I believe some form of the European Union is going to be at the helm. And the reason I think that is Daniel chapter 2 has a very detailed description of the characteristics that this revived Roman Empire will have, such as it will be a number of different nations, both small and large, trying to align themselves together and strengthen themselves through alliance. We see that. It says it will be a volatile alliance, much like mixing iron and clay. That's what we've seen. I mean, look at Brexit and all the fights over currency union and all the fights over what to do with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so we see this constant back and forth between those nations. And, we see some of the largest economies and militaries in the world and some of the smallest as part of that union. Where it does not fit is we don't see the 10 kings. There's 27 members of the EU right now. So that doesn't exist. I don't know how this will happen. But again, I believe the Bible teaches a revived Roman Empire. This final kingdom will be a version of a revived Roman Empire. So I would expect that that's where it would be. And again, I expect that it's going to be a conquering of other nations. There will be probably some sort of assimilation and cooperation among the powers that are left over. But I don't think that it's necessarily going to be, hey, let's sing Kumbaya and form a global government. I think it's going to be a force that's used to make that happen. And then the Bible teaches the Antichrist is at the helm of that global empire.
And going back to drone warfare, I like to joke. I mean, I every week track this stuff, included in my weekly analysis, and I joke Skynet is becoming self-aware, referencing the Terminator films. And you've painted some interesting pictures. You use bee swarms as an example. Like if a bee swarm is coming at you and you get a shotgun and you shoot it, sure, you'll take out a few bees, but then the rest are going to get you. And same applies to shotgun using. Imagine appearing, I've seen maybe one of my neighbors, maybe it was a narco surveilling my house. I don't know. We saw a drone in our backyard and I wasn't quick enough to get there. And if I did, I would have taken a chair and smashed it. But, if there's an entire drone swarm coming at you, it's very difficult to defeat yourself. We've seen footage in Ukraine of soldiers, Russian or Ukrainian soldiers running from drones. They get tired. Eventually, you can't outrun it, and it gets to you. And I was thinking of another example. All right, so it was reported this week that Ukraine, they have put in now 31 contracts, I think hundreds of millions of dollars to produce now thousands of drones, robot dogs, drones. Last year they had only had 6 contracts for hundreds. And so this kind of goes to what you're saying in your books. You also talk about the exponential curve on everything. But just your thoughts when it comes to this drone technology. I think it's going to be like the show Black Mirror. It's going to be used against global populations eventually. So once this is all set up, each country is going to have this technology, and we're seeing this trend now where the economy is collapsing. They're getting rid of politicians. They need less, soldiers and police because they're bringing in this technology. So, what's sort of your snapshot of what you think life would look like under such a regime?
Oh, I think it would be one where they know every single thing about you and have the capability to control every aspect of your life. So, what you mentioned, what we see in Russia, Ukraine right now with these drones, if you talk to both sides, they say the big bottleneck that they have is in production, bringing these drones to scale. So they're constantly innovating on the front of onboarding AI, putting together swarms that are decentralized, that can act in different ways and learn on the battlefield. But manufacturing these drones at scale is the big problem and the big effort that they face. And that's why I said molecular manufacturing is probably the most important of these advanced technologies, because it solves that problem. You'll be building, it's atomically precise manufacturing, building from the bottom up very quickly, very rapidly. You could manufacture these drone swarms on the battlefield. And to talk about, to visualize what you're talking about, I think a swarm of bees is perfect, because when we talk about drone swarms today, people think of the types of drones we might buy at the store that they show us on the news that are, size of a laptop computer, and a swarm is 5 of these things. No, they're going to get much smaller, much more sophisticated, much more powerful. And they're going to be in swarms of hundreds, thousands, millions. They could manufacture in the trillions if needed. And I think as part of that, when we had those types of technologies available, and a global empire would be able to create what I call smart dust, which means they could create trillions of audio and video feeds that spread across the world like dust. I mean, they just settle on your countertop everywhere around you, and they are constantly taking in what's happening and then feeding that through AI, picking out patterns. And we've seen already how sophisticated these algorithms are at picking out patterns. I don't know what your experience is, but I've had numerous experiences where the TV knew what I wanted to watch before I did, where this isn't a show I regularly watch, but I thought about it, and I turn on the TV and it's the first option it gives me. So this tells us already the level at which companies and governments are tracking our behavior, everything about us, and they're building these profiles, these digital twins of us, to predict what our behavior is going to be. And so when you think about the ability to take in almost unlimited amounts of information, we'll have a government that will seem all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipresent, and there will be nowhere to hide from it. So that's the future that I envision is coming, and it's not a pleasant one if you love freedom and liberty.
No, I mean, I had a recent example. I was looking at flight options for Europe, and I'd never flown on, but Iberia Airlines out of Spain. And as you said, in my Twitter ad feed, I started seeing Iberia ad. And that was, I mean, just a perfect example. And just, along these lines, this is something that I'm most fascinated about, worried about is, back in 2020, I interviewed Edwin Black, the renowned Jewish historian who wrote IBM and the Holocaust and those books. And I've taken to popularizing his term for all of this, which is the algorithm ghetto, the social credit system, the digital gulag, where he effectively says in this, it's going to be, a cashless society. Once they remove cash, like you said, they're going to have total surveillance. They're going to know everything. They're going to have digital twins, modeling, pre-crime, and then they can just shut you off at the press of a button. Edwin Black would say, they don't have to send Gestapo, Stasi anymore to your door. That's no longer needed. I mean, they have, as we were mentioning, the drones if they really need it to track you down, but they just unperson you. They make you a zombie, a non-entity, so you cannot even buy food. And so they just hit the button, wait a couple of weeks, you'll die slowly of starvation in your home. Your neighbors won't help you because then they'll be put in the same position. And, where we see CBDCs coming online, country after country is implementing mandatory national digital ID. I've been debanked on certain platforms. And so what are your thoughts on this that's coming? I think, these systems are still coming online and they have their birth pangs. Like in Nigeria, they jumped the gun and it backfired a bit, but they're going to still continue pushing it. And I think within our lifetime, as you say, it's going to get to a point where I eventually imagine myself not being able to do much. And so just your thoughts on this sort of social credit system that's coming in.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you. We've seen efforts in Nigeria hit a roadblock, but they're going to keep coming. They're learning from that. They're bound and determined to push central bank digital currencies on the whole world. You can look at something like 98% of all GDP currently has some sort of pilot program in place for central bank digital currencies. And, less people think that we're talking about things way off in the future. Obviously, if you're in China, you're dealing with this already. If you're in Europe, they're saying October. That's 6 months. October, we're going to roll this out. And they lie to people. They push out all these propaganda pieces. Anything in Europe where they're proposing digital IDs, central bank digital currency, they always use these flowery adjectives to make everything sound wonderful. Oh, it's going to be so convenient and helpful. It gives you choice and freedom and all of these things. And it's nothing of the sort. And they claim, well, you'll be able to use it alongside of cash. Oh, we're not going to track people, right? Which is laughable. I don't know how anybody could buy into that, because we've seen the assault on cash in Europe. Depending on where you are there, they put different limits. Anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 euros can't be used in a transaction, or else you face criminal penalties. And so there's a war on cash. And their stated reason is, well, you might be a drug dealer or a money launderer or a terrorist. You're involved in criminal activity if you use cash. But we're going to roll out this digital euro and we're not going to track anybody, right? I mean, even though we had the ability to surveil and look for terrorists and drug dealers and money launderers, we're not going to do that. It's laughable. Yet people are buying it. People are buying into this because they don't understand what it means that once you walk into that trap, there is no way out, because just as you were saying, they can cut off your ability to buy and sell, which is right out of the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17 talked about this almost 2,000 years ago. We've never seen this in the history of the world until now. And we're seeing this roll out all over the world. And they will have this ability to control every aspect of your life, because, as you said, it's programmable. They could say, well, we don't like that tweet you sent out, so your currency doesn't work anywhere outside of a mile from your house, or even less, or it can't be used to buy plane tickets or a train ticket. And they can put pretty much any provisions on that they want. They can flip a switch, just as we saw with the Canadian protesters. They can cut your funding off in an instant. And so think of the chilling effect this has on political dissidents. So if you, they already have so much information about us already. They're starting to think, well, this person might have some thoughts that are against the narrative. We need to pay special close attention to them. But then if you actually try to organize anything to protest the government or to build a political movement in opposition to what they're pushing, they can simply cut off your ability to exist within the economy. And despite what some people think, it's not so easy to just go out into the woods and live on your own. It's very, very difficult. So not being able to buy or sell within the economy is, for all intents and purposes, a death sentence. And this power was just right at their disposal.
And buy and sell, famously, to ask you about the mark of the beast, again, with some of the guests I've already mentioned, I view it both as a spiritual principle. It's been around, this mark of the beast, but often with prophecy, it becomes like there's dual, fulfillments, and then it becomes fulfilled in its totality at the very end. And so for me, the principle of the mark of the beast is, do you accept Christ or reject him? Or we've seen many times in the Roman, during COVID, we had to have certificates during COVID to prove our biological purity. As a joke, I purchased on eBay, it's right behind me, from 1938, Nazi Germany, I think it's called the Ahnen Pass, which was to prove your Aryan German family history, which was a way of proving your biological purity. Having that Ahnen Pass passport, kind of like the 2020s, we had to have these passports. And so it's been a theme that's been recurring throughout history. If I'm not mistaken, I read during the Roman Empire, they had times where you had to conduct an animal sacrifice to pagan gods and obtain a certificate or license that you did that. And if you didn't, you can go to jail, be fined. And so it's kind of, even back then, people were dealing in false passports and certificates. And I've even read during the Holy Roman Empire, I found a primary source which said, under the Catholic Church, if you didn't subscribe to the Catholic Church, you wouldn't be able to buy or sell. And I think we're just now reaching this being fulfilled in totality. And so your thoughts on the mark of the beast? I can see it being a physical implant. Many years ago, I had on the podcast Catherine Albrecht. She wrote the book Spy Chips. She was a Christian as well. She just kind of seemed to have disappeared off the planet. I don't know what's going on with her. I know she battled cancer, but I could also see this mark not having to be physical, because now you're seeing biometrics come online, facial recognition, and you can just pay with your face or pay with your palm. And so it would be the same principle where you go to the store, you go to the government office, you go to the airport, the bus station, and you go to pay with your face or your palm. But as you mentioned, because you're a dissident, a red flash comes and access denied, your payment doesn't go through, and now you can't do anything. So just your thoughts on the mark of the beast.
Sure. Yeah, I tend to think that it'll probably be a physically visible sign of some sort. But what's important, and I don't know what form it'll take, but what I know is these systems we see being put into place right now, they're indistinguishable in capability and function from the mark of the beast we read about in the book of Revelation. So we may not see people right now saying, put a mark on your right hand or on your forehead, but they're trying to convince people to enter into the system. And I believe Reason Magazine did a piece recently called Sleepwalking into a Cashless Society, about how people are voluntarily doing this. Younger people don't have any cash whatsoever. It's a foreign concept to them. And so this system, and oftentimes these central bank digital currencies are being linked within apps that they aren't even aware they're using central bank digital currency. So this can very slowly encumber people without them even realizing it. And again, it's indistinguishable in capability and function from that system, because they'll be able to control every aspect of your life and determine what you can buy, what you can sell. And of course, the other half of that is these tokenized assets that they're pushing, because it's like, well, what are you buying and selling? Let's track as much of what you're buying and selling as possible so that we can control you even further, right? And then let's roll out digital IDs as part of this process to give you access to this whole system. And so this is a tyrannical system that it's not one that, as we see in history, people could rise up in rebellion against. There's not really a way you can rise up in rebellion against this once it comes into being, because, again, they'll be able to eliminate the leadership rather quickly, and people will realize rather quickly, I better fall into line unless I want these things to happen to me. Unfortunately, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, where do you go? I mean, you go attack the one of hundreds, thousands of data centers, around you. It's kind of like I think it's Terminator 3, was it, or the fourth installment with Christian Bale, where they went to attack like the data center that was running all of the Skynet machines, and it's just so massive. It's what you talk about. If we go back in history, we had smaller governments. We knew where everyone was. We didn't have this layer of technology, but now it's just this massive beast. And before continuing, I just want to get your thoughts here. I'm criticized a lot for being black-pilled, but people these days, people are looking for hopium, for cope, right? They cling on to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to save us. Others cling on to mere mortal men. Trump is going to save us, and they consider some of us as black-pilled. And I'm just trying to get an honest reconnaissance of the lay of the land, like a good soldier or analyst would do. I'm removing my emotions. I'm just trying to see what is the reality that we're facing. And every podcast, this is what I'm seeing. And my white pill, is spiritual. Someone recently posted a tweet that said the black pill is only for those who put their hope in political solutions, right? Bitcoin or Trump. If you don't like my white pill, fine, but don't call me a black pill. Just thoughts for people who have a difficulty sort of not having a nervous breakdown hearing all that we're discussing.
Well, I believe our Savior is Jesus Christ. So, and Jesus says, I can give a peace that the world cannot give. So if people are looking for the way out, the way of escape, the way to be saved from all of this, it's found in Jesus Christ. That's my opinion. There is no other way. Bitcoin is going to let you down. Donald Trump is going to let you down. All these other systems are going to let you down. I mean, I look at Bitcoin. I'm not sure that Bitcoin wasn't created by the government. I point out time and again, we had this incident in the United States, I believe it was about 4 years ago, this exact time, where a ransomware attack took place against the Colonial Pipeline. It was in the southeastern US where I'm at. This was a big pipeline that ran gasoline to all the gas stations. And within 3 or 4 days, all the gas stations were out. And supposedly the Colonial Pipeline they paid the ransom in Bitcoin to these hackers. And then at the bottom of this news story I'm reading, they're like, but the FBI got it back. And I thought, well, that should be the lead. They always bury the lead in these stories way at the bottom. So you should start reading news stories from the bottom up, because you'll probably get the really good stuff at the bottom. They like to bury it. But I thought, well, how is that possible? I thought that this was this decentralized network that money launderers and drug traffickers use because it's untrackable, unhackable, all these other things. Is there some sort of back door that the government has built into it? I don't know. But then again, it's also a technology. Those technologies become obsolete, and we're entering an age of quantum computing. And so you have, I believe it was recently the Michael Saylor, the head of MicroStrategy, that's invested billions of dollars of investor money into Bitcoin. He was asked, well, what happens if quantum computing comes along, makes this obsolete, and Bitcoin hasn't adapted in time? Oh, well, they'll have bigger fish to fry. The whole world banking system will be open. Nobody will care about Bitcoin. That could never happen, but they'll go after bigger targets. And the point should be, it would become worthless that instant. The moment that it comes online, it would become worthless. So again, putting your hope in these different things, I believe, leads to failure. Putting your hope in Jesus Christ is the place to put it, I believe. Jesus said, if it's akin to building your house on solid rock, and when the storm comes, it won't be washed away. Everything else is building your house on shifting sand. When that storm comes, the storm's going to take that house out.
Yeah, no, I often think of the saying, memento mori, right? To think about, contemplate death. And for me, it's like, okay, you have your little rural, bunker and all that, but we're all going to die eventually, regardless of whether it's going to be through being digitally unpersoned or blown up by a drone. And for me, I keep searching, but I mean, I keep you always got to examine your own beliefs, but I can't find a better answer to death than what's given in the Bible. You look at all these other religions. I know there's a portion of listeners who are very much into the New Age, and I don't find solid answers there, that we are all part of some consciousness mysteriously that we revert back to. But okay, who's operating this consciousness? How's it operating? What's the energy or force behind it? And so I'm going to stick with the Bible. And you answered my Bitcoin question. I see it the same as you do. And just one more before getting to the financial collapse, AI and transhumanism. Right, that's another angle. So we've talked about the technocracy, but then I think there's one step further. We heard Larry Ellison of Oracle recently talk about, Tony Blair is pushing the digital IDs hard. They're going to try to get rid of passwords and push biometric logins. They've said, and kind of as you explained, we went from no smartphones to having dumb phones to smartphones. And they're saying in the future, in 10 years, there's not going to be smartphones. So is that going to mean we're going to, there's going to be some implant to have access to this stuff, or we're going to have to wear the augmented reality glasses, or something like the brain chip is like the next version of the smartphone. And so just your thoughts on this trend and what they're trying to do with transhumanism. I think we can see a lot of these elites. They are probably applying life extension technology to themselves. You mean you just look at Larry Ellison, you look at Peter Thiel. He looks sickly. Actually, I don't know what he's taking. Ray Kurzweil takes 200 supplements reportedly daily to try to extend his life. By that time, I think all of this is a pipe dream, and they will never be able to push through that ceiling. I read an article 10 years ago from like a mainstream science publication, which said, in the Bible, it says God tops it off more or less, not exactly, right? 120 years. Some people live to be 115, 125. But the scientific article said, we can't explain, people who are elderly, who are healthy, live to 90, 100. But no matter what, as soon as they approach around 115, they break down, and we just can't push through that. They can't understand why. And so just your thoughts on transhumanism.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think this is, I believe, going to be the dominant philosophy in the days ahead. It already is in Silicon Valley. It already is among the globalist world leaders. And we see it with, say, Elon Musk, when a couple of years ago, when they were talking about the clinical trials for the Neuralink brain chip, they were talking about, oh, well, the blind will be able to see and the lame will walk. Of course, that has implications for Bible prophecy as well. But he, in talking about this, again, at the end of the story, where they bury the lead, he says, I'm going to get one too. I said, well, that's interesting, because I didn't know that Elon Musk was blind or paralyzed. So why is he going to get one? Well, because, as you said, he's a transhumanist who believes that he's going to be able to augment his body with these advancing technologies. So we're seeing that pushed. Again, many people will gladly do this. And all jokes aside, we probably know a number of people who we would think are already merged with their smartphones right now. So is it really far-fetched to believe that they'll take it from right here to right here, like just a few inches away, and free up their hands in the process, right? So the world is going to do that. I think this ties in with Skynet and AI, as you've been talking about, because we see this repeated over and over in the mainstream corporate media, this idea that AI is this great concern, that AI is going to turn on humanity. Humanity will become obsolete. And a lot of that's based on everybody having watched the Terminator movies, right? But the reality is that human beings are going to merge with the AI. So the concern shouldn't be the AI. Concern should be enhanced humanity, because the AI it's neither good nor bad. It's just a tool. It's no different than any other technology. There's nothing good or bad about a train or a automobile or a hammer, right? But the human heart is filled with wickedness. We're fallen men. And so you combine those two, what this does, it's a technology that's going to amplify our characteristics. So some cases that might mean some really good things. Hey, the blind can see again and the lame can walk again. But in other ways, it's going to amplify the evil of the human heart to degrees that we cannot even fathom. I often talk about, let's look at the Holocaust. Again, there's nothing evil about a train and railroad tracks. There's nothing evil about an industrial assembly line. There's nothing evil about an oven, but the human heart combined all of those things into extermination camps. And so we should expect to see the same thing is going to happen with these other advanced technologies as we see this move forward. It's human beings that we need to be concerned about, not technology itself.
And, because you just brought something up, I want to extrapolate a bit here, because again, there's a portion of the listenership, and I've been vocal about this for years now, that you can go too far down the rabbit hole. So, in alternative media, we expand them on topics. We push the Overton window because the mainstream is propaganda generally. But now we're seeing a host in alternative media. I pointed out years ago that it's just full of New Age Gnostic theosophic beliefs, anti-Christian stuff, and it just keeps growing. And they're talking about how the God of the Old Testament is the demiurge, Jesus was an alien, all this sort of stuff. And then you're hearing all this talk about nuclear weapons don't exist, contagion doesn't exist, infectious disease, of course, the Holocaust. And from my research, I think it's clear that Hitler was a bad guy. He did bad things. That there, I've looked at some of the primary sources. I often have to repeat that my grandfather was a prisoner for half a year of the Croatian Nazi regime, and so, and yes, maybe some of the numbers. I think we could look at that fairly factually. Are it's an open debate on the numbers, but I find it hard to reject that these things didn't happen at all, or that nuclear weapons, they say, don't exist. I lived in Kazakhstan. I lived near to the principal Soviet nuclear test site where Stalin dropped the first bomb in 1949. It's called the Polygon. It's an 18,000 square kilometer patch of land. I went to the Kurchatov, to the institute where the scientists are. They drove me hours in to the nuclear test site, and I had my own Geiger counters. They showed radiation. I was standing where a bomb actually dropped. And then for people to say, nukes don't exist. So I think I just want to get your opinion on the need for nuance, for not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, maybe they fib. We can't get to the entire truth of these different topics. For example, I don't believe the nuclear winter theory. I think that could be exaggerated, but nukes will certainly blow up entire cities. And so just your thoughts on sort of treading carefully when examining these issues.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I agree with nuclear winter. Again, nuclear bombs have been dropped and life continues going on. So, there's life can go on after that fact. So we need to, carefully examine all of these things in light of the truth. I mean, we just got to, searching for truth is something we should be vigilant about and constant about. And I don't know what more we can do other than that.
Financial collapse. You spend a lot of time looking at the financial collapse. This week is pretty crazy. There's a section in the Bible which speaks of Babylon eventually falling and collapsing, and the world lamenting because no one's she's not buying their wares anymore. So thoughts on the coming financial collapse?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is we're in a global depression. I think people finally started to wake up to this based on the Trump tariffs, perhaps. But we've seen China in a global deflationary spiral for a number of years. They've lost $18 trillion in real estate market value in the last 4 years alone. That's 50% more than the United States lost during the Great Financial Crisis. We see this in Germany with the deindustrialization of Germany following the Russia-Ukraine war and the unreliability of cheap Russian energy coming into the country and the green policies that are being enacted there. So we're already seeing the global economy in a depression prior to the Trump tariffs coming on. And again, I believe there's something much deeper there with a restructuring of this post-World War II global financial and military order that's taking place. But we're also looking, I believe, at an epic financial crisis where we have the nation of Japan, the fourth largest economy in the world, has been engaged in these really, call them ridiculous policies for many years now, where in order to keep their national debt from just blowing up everything, they've artificially suppressed interest rates by the Bank of Japan printing yen to turn around and buy the Japanese government bonds to a point where I believe they own more than half of them at this point. And so they risk hyperinflation the longer they do that. And so they've tried to back off from that policy a little bit over the course of the past several months and try to start raising rates. And by raising rates, we're talking about from 0 to 0.1 up to 0.15. I mean, very small increments. We saw that blow up last August with the reversal of the yen carry trade that was taking place, the largest 2-day drop in Japanese stock market history. I believe we're seeing something very similar happening right now as we speak. And I think this is going to be the greatest economic and financial crisis in the history of the world. And they're going to tell us the solution is the central bank digital currencies and digital IDs and tokenized assets. And we'll be able to prevent this from happening. We already see this in some of a couple of years ago, the FDIC, which is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in the United States of America, they were talking about what to do in the case of the failure of a systemically important bank. How do we resolve this crisis? And lost in all of that, there were some big sound bites that went around social media on that. But one of the participants asked, well, what do we do about non-financial institutions that are systemically important, meaning hedge funds, family offices, others that don't fall under our regulatory purview? And the answer was, well, we can't do anything. We don't have legal ability to see what they're doing. So I can imagine in the aftermath of the next crisis, they would say, like, well, let's take the great financial crisis for an example. Bernie Madoff is famous for running the largest Ponzi scheme in the world at the time, and that got uncovered in the midst of that crisis. They could say, well, we would have been able to prevent that with central bank digital currency. When investors handed over their dollars to Bernie Madoff, we would have known that he used those to buy a yacht and mansions around the world, and that he didn't buy any securities or the investors he claimed that he was buying. And people will buy into this. They'll say, you mean you can prevent this type of fraud in the future? People who have lost their life savings, people who are in desperate situations will hear this will prevent this. And they'll say, we need 21st century regulations and 21st century tools to deal with the 21st century economy. And you're already hearing them say this. European central banks saying this. They're saying, we need to be innovative. This is urgent. We need to be innovative. We need to be at the forefront. Well, why? Now, why does this have to be in the currency? You could have gold and silver coinage as your money and still be innovative within your economy. But what they really mean is, if we don't take over the lives of our citizens and maybe people even outside of our borders, some other nation like China will. Because we're already seeing that with digital renminbi going out, and I think $1.2 trillion in transactions last year across borders, a cross-border settlement taking place in 7 seconds instead of 3 to 5 days under the SWIFT system. And so you can see the efficiencies that governments and corporations will gladly adopt. And then they'll push those down as benefits to everybody else. And if you get enough people in there, and they'll incentivize all of this, they'll say, well, you can get discounts at your favorite store if you use the central bank digital currency. You can go claim your wallet, and there's $10,000 waiting there for you. We saw this during the pandemic with, the mayor of New York going, come on down and get a cheeseburger and fries, right? So, just any incentive using the carrot and the stick in whatever ways they can to get as many people to buy in as possible. Problem is, once they get enough people to buy in, even the holdouts will find that you go to stores, they no longer take cash. They no longer take anything that's not CBDC related. So they only need a portion of the population to go along. And once they do, they can shut the trap closed on everybody else. And so, fortunately, it looks like this is where this is headed. I've seen a lot of people excited in the United States. Well, Donald Trump came in and he signed this executive order saying we won't have central bank digital currency here. Well, maybe not. Maybe they'll have it and just not call it that, right? but the Federal Reserve's continuing forward with all the projects it had before Trump came into office. And he's just one man in office for at most 4 years. And the whole rest of the world continues to pursue this. And there's no sign that people in power are backing down from any of this. So we have to draw the reasonable conclusion that this is going to come into being. And once it does, again, there's no escape from it. At that point, we may not have one systematic global tyranny at that point, but we'll have global tyranny everywhere that those currencies reign until they come under the umbrella of one man.
I just see it as you do. It's just a matter of time. And again, we just this whole talk of pills and white pills, it's irrelevant because what we're discussing, we just see it proceeding. It's not stopping. Even in anyone's daily life, you go to the shops, you see it's increasing. Everyone's paying with, very few people are paying with cash. And I almost on a weekly basis now, I wonder the next time I go to the supermarket if they're going to take my cash. Anytime I do go now to the supermarket, to the corner store, the convenience store, the first thing the teller asks me, and they ask me forcefully, they ask me for my phone number or if I have the points card, to which I scoff at and forcefully say, no. Like, to buy a piece of bread, I have to give my phone number now. And they've conditioned us through that, as you said. You get discounts if you have their little point system, which feeds into this social credit system. It's going to be the same thing with the CBDC. You'll get discounts initially to be brought into the system, but then once you're in, I've already mentioned the story before in one of my banking apps, they already have a carbon footprint tracker. They're calculating my carbon footprint. Because I use cash, it's not very large, but they have categories for everything: food, energy, gas, electricity. And so once they've calculated all that, if you go beyond their limit, as you mentioned, they will not allow you to make purchases. Or I think one of the first options is they're just going to simply, add a tax that's double the price. You want to buy a steak that's, $10, now it's 20 or 30 or $40, and you can't afford the steak anymore. And you mentioned previously the dollar, which is the world reserve. What do you think could replace it? Larry Fink, again, I'm with you on all of that. He's talking about Bitcoin replacing the dollar world reserve. We've had since the 40s Keynes and this idea of a one world IMF special drawing, or Bancor or special drawing rights, IMF special drawing rights, which would be this, one world currency effectively. And do you think the dollar will eventually, do you think they'll find a way to make the dollar the one world currency, dollarize the world, or just have that collapse and bring something new in?
I really don't know. So I would see already the U.S. Treasury is the world's reserve asset, and the reserve asset that central banks are searching for has been replaced by gold. We've seen that slowly happening for over a decade at this point, and I think that now that's completed. We see, all the central bank gold buying that's going on. But I think as far as a trade currency and these currencies that roll out, I don't know if one thing would replace the dollar, but we may see just simple national central bank digital currencies. The Bank of International Settlements had this project a little over a year ago called Project Icebreaker, which was a platform. They had piloted this with, I believe it's 10 or 12 different nations and their central banks to build a uniform platform that would be used by all the nations. So you can have your own central bank digital currency, but in order to trade or facilitate exchange of trade between nations and currencies, the Bank of International Settlements would sit at the top and facilitate those transactions. So you could see a world in which there are 100 different central bank digital currencies, but there's one bank at the top of all of them with control over all of them, and maybe sort of backdoor access to all of them. Just as we were talking about, was that already the case with Bitcoin? We could see the Bank of International Settlements have something like that with all the world's central bank digital currencies. So I'm not sure exactly what would replace the dollar. That's why I said we're in this period that's very volatile right now, where we could see a whole range of things happen. But I think that the era of United States dominance over the financial and military order of the globe is at an end. It's waning, and soon it will be minimal at best.
And just on the point that you made about CBDC, some of the projects I've looked at, they talk about basically what you're saying, creating interoperable system. So we'll have all of these CBDCs and they'll be interoperable, and it creates like this global mesh network system. Let's get a little funky then and move into eschatology and prophecy. And something I think you wrote, which was absolutely fascinating, and I've been toying with this theory. I've seen a few others bring it up. We have talk about UFOs now and aliens increasingly, and many decades ago, we've had people warn that the powers that be would stage a fake alien contact or invasion. I believe Werner von Braun, the Nazi of NASA, warned of that, among others. The report from Iron Mountain in 1967 also, I believe, discussed that. And I think you posited a theory when we talk about Armageddon. It won't be nations against nations, but it'll be nations coming together, perhaps to fend off the second coming. And I mean, it makes perfect logical sense if you think about it, where all these elites are building bunkers for some event that's coming. I think Elon Musk and others have stressed, they're obsessed with 2030. And then they're talking about asteroids, these threats from outer space, where I effectively don't see any threat from outer space apart from the return of Christ. I could see them, like, I'm thinking like how I think they would think, that they are Satanists, they reject God, and but if they believe this force is coming, maybe they're like, I think this is crazy thought, but I could see them entertaining this, where maybe they'll try to volley nukes at Jesus, but it'll just brush right off him. We're getting into funky territory here, but your sort of thoughts on all of this, and another angle is this New Age Gnostic angle. We've seen it in Ridley Scott films like Prometheus, where they're trying to tell us this idea that extraterrestrials exist, and therefore that they created us, these alternate beings, and therefore there is no God or Christ or sin or need for repentance. So just your sort of thoughts on this whole scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned Ray Kurzweil earlier, and he wrote a book in 2006 called "The Singularity Is Near," and this really jolted me into exactly where the transhumanist movement was going. Because toward the end of that, he talks about, and then human beings will expand into outer space, infusing our intelligence into all the dumb matter in the universe. And so I read that and I thought, wow, he's making the assumption that the universe is not already infused with intelligence. And now he's putting himself in direct physical confrontation with God, not just spiritual confrontation with God. And so when you look at what the Bible actually says about the Battle of Armageddon, it doesn't say anything about the armies of the world gathering together to do battle against one another. It says the Antichrist leads the kings of the world and the armies together to the place called Armageddon. And it says to do battle against Jesus Christ, against the one sitting on the white horse that returns. I mean, there's two passages in both, one in Revelation 16, one in Revelation 19, that state that. Also, the first 4 verses of Psalm 2 talk about the kings of the world gathering together and saying, come, let us throw off the shackles, essentially, of the Lord and his anointed one. And so it's the very things that we hear the transhumanist movement saying today, that we're going to throw off the shackles of these biological bodies that weigh us down. And so, yes, when you have a rebellious mankind that's long been in spiritual rebellion, advancing technologically to the point where they could say, we're going to finish this rebellion. We're going to place ourselves as God. You have so many people saying, well, artificial intelligence is the God we're creating because it's going to be all knowing, it's going to be all powerful, all of these things. And again, we read those things in the book of Revelation. We read in regard to the Antichrist, people say, who is this powerful? It's the beast. Who can wage war against him? So, and he has dominion over all the people of the world, every people, nation, tribe, and language. So that begs the question, well, what armies are gathering at Armageddon to do battle against him when we've already been told none can? And we read in the book of Daniel that he's only overthrown by supernatural power, meaning Jesus Christ, the return of Jesus Christ. So when you read these passages from that standpoint, it's very clear. And you might go, well, why hasn't this been the accepted belief throughout the last many centuries? And I think the answer is because it just, on the face of it, it seems so absurd to us to think that this could happen. Because, and especially for centuries where seemingly technology didn't change and these abilities did not exist. But when we look back in the book of Genesis and read the Tower of Babel story, where God, you have a united mankind that is building a tower as a monument to their own greatness. And God comes and confuses their languages. And the reason he says he does that is because left alone, nothing would be impossible for them. So I take that at face value, meaning nothing, including physical rebellion against the Lord and creator of the universe. And again, that's when we read Revelation, that's what the Bible tells us Armageddon is. So I believe that unless the Bible tells us otherwise, we should take it literally and at face value of what it says when it says it.
To cite Bob Dylan, All Along the Watchtower, let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late. And he's toyed with Christianity, although he finally gave an interview. Perhaps you've seen it. I'm a big fan of the work done by Good Fight Ministries, Pastor Joe Schimmel. I've got their 10-hour long documentary on They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. And in there, they include a lot of primary source footage. And Bob Dylan actually admitted that he made a deal with the devil. He said, the interviewer asked him, why do you keep going and making all this music into your old age? And he says, well, I made a deal with the commander. And he's referring to Satan, basically. But just your thoughts on where we're at, the lateness of the hour. Your books talk about this. You talk about how everything, and I've thought about this often, for thousands and thousands of years of human history, things have kind of stayed static. But once you enter into the 1800s, 1900s, everything just goes nuts. And we're talking whether it's, currencies like with the way money printing, devaluation, industrialism. Now we're in the fourth industrial revolution, fifth. Some people say fifth industrial revolution. I read there's a company now trying to manufacture commercial the supersonic jets. So for any one of us that could afford it to travel supersonically across the planet, and then there are other examples. The Bible says that the gospel would be preached and then the end comes, and there are some organizations that say pretty soon, as early as the 2030s, the Bible will be translated into every language of every people group. It's already pretty much, I think, the world has been covered, and so we see many of these different signs. Just your thoughts on the lateness of the hour.
Yeah, I think it's as late as it can be. So I'm sure when we talk about this, there will be some people that say, well, yeah, people have been saying this for centuries now, that Jesus is coming back. And yes, that's right out of 2 Peter chapter 3. He says that in the end times, in the last days, there will be scoffers that will come that will say, where's the sign of the Lord's coming? People have been saying this for years and years and years, but everything remains the same as it's always been. But nothing could be further from the truth. And I hear people say that today. I've heard people say that in Bible studies before. Nothing could be further from the truth for the reasons you just cited. For up until about 200 years ago, things pretty much were the same as they had always been. The fastest man could travel on land was horseback. And then we had the development of the Industrial Revolution. We went to trains, we went to cars, we went to these jets, like you said, that'll go all around the earth. I like to point out here's some exponential change for you. I'm not too far away from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where the Wright brothers had the first man-control flight that everybody had said was impossible. I think they flew for like 59 seconds and 100 yards or something along those lines. It wasn't very far or long. 66 years later, we have men on the moon. That's exponential change. Things today are not the same as they have always been. They're dramatically different. And as you said, we see all these signs coming. And Jesus said, when you begin to see all these things take place, know that I'm near, right at the door. He talks about the convergence of those signs being the sign that will alert people that he's right at the door, that you should look up, your salvation draws near. So he's telling us that the generation we're in right now, that again is seeing things like the central bank digital currencies we just talked about. None of that technology was possible. To control all buy-sell transactions outside of the supernatural was impossible until right now. And even right now, you could argue it's impossible, but very soon it will not be. And so we're seeing this convergence of all these signs the Bible pointed to in our day and time that previous generations simply did not see. And so again, the Bible is telling us, Jesus himself is telling us, this is the generation, this is the time frame I'm coming back. No one knows the day or the hour. But I point out all the time, Jesus didn't say, well, when you see all those signs, I'll come back in maybe a couple hundred years, or if these things happen, I'll change my mind. No, he said, when you see all these things take place, I'm right at the door. And we see all those things take place right here in our day and time. And that tells us the lateness of the hour and how critical it is to come to know Jesus. Because again, we pointed out, he is the only Savior. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And we have all these Silicon Valley transhumanists that say, well, I'm going to live forever. I'm going to conquer death. But the Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death, that death comes from sin. It's not a biological process. And that the only way to overcome death in the grave is through the blood of Jesus Christ shed on the cross for sinners, for us. He paid the price. He paid the penalty for us on the cross. That's why Jesus is our Savior. And he died, he went to the grave, and then he rose again 3 days later. And he's seated at the right hand of the Father today, preparing a place for those who trust in him, who love him. And so, guys, Jesus is coming back one day soon. I don't know exactly when, but by his own admission, he's very near. He's right at the door in our day and time.
Yeah, we have these folks like Brian Johnson, who recently started his movement called Don't Die. And I don't think it's a joke. He's spending millions on extending his life, and he actually thinks he's going to defeat death, which, apart from Christ, hasn't been achieved in all of human history. And even though you said earlier that, the Bible states that man would be able to achieve anything they put their mind to it, I think we can parse that. I think in many ways, yes, but I still don't think mankind would be able to develop technologies to defeat death, the way that they're trying now. And I don't like to focus too much on dates, but I just like to, from time to time, think about these things. And, rightfully, many people who don't believe the Bible have pointed out to all the times throughout past history, the Jehovah's Witnesses, many other groups who, would say this year is the end and nothing ever happens. And I think they're right to do that, because that's a very foolish thing to do. But nonetheless, Isaac Newton, I was shocked to discover, some say Isaac Newton was a Christian, others say he dabbled in esoteric matter. In the end, that's between him and God. I have no idea, but he wrote a lot on Bible and Bible prophecy. And 20 years ago, when I was looking at this, apparently Isaac Newton calculated what could be the maximum end time, and I think he said the 2060s, which would be not too long, a couple decades from now. There are other theories. There's a popular YouTube channel called I think Messiah 2030, which postulates that it could be as early as the 2030s right now, and that kind of for different reasons. But just any thoughts on those issues or what
Yeah, I would point out, as you said, there have been all these date setters in the past that have been completely wrong. Those were human beings that were wrong. The Bible was not wrong. It was the human beings making those claims, not the Bible. The Bible didn't say Jesus is returning in 1844. That was the Millerites that said that. It wasn't. It was Harold Camping said Jesus would return several years ago, not the Bible. So the Bible's track record when it comes to prophecy and fulfilled prophecy is 100% accurate. It's never been wrong. The Bible says, God says, that's the mark of a true prophet, 100% accuracy. God calls out all the false idols in the book of Isaiah and says that this ability to foretell the future in advance is something that only he can do. And we see that in the Bible. It's God's watermark. I wrote a whole book about this that people might enjoy. It's called Coming to Jesus. It's free ebook on Amazon, Apple, Google Play. Again, you can download it on your phone for free, but I didn't grow up in a church. I came to Jesus as a result of studying what is truth. I sought out what is the truth. And then I discovered these fulfilled prophecies that I could not find anywhere outside of the Bible. They're only in the Bible. And again, God himself calls out and says, this is my signature, my watermark. This authenticates this as my word. And so again, God's word is 100% accurate, always has been. I have every reason to believe it will continue to be. But just because some people have made prognostications in the past that didn't come to be, well, that's those people who were in error, not the Bible itself.
And something to bring up, this often gets in my comments. And again, I think some of these people they're coming from a worldview that is New Age, Gnostic, or Theosophic. And they say, that there's this cabal that's running the world. And, to extent, I think that's true. Ultimately, for me, the great architect, the chief commander is Satan. Right. A lot of people will say it's this or that people group, or I just find, I go back. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mark Passio. So he's not a believer. He's a former Satanist, but now he's exposing it. He does a lot of good work, and he calls it the occultocracy. And he says he poo-poos the people who say it's the Jews, and there are many factions. You've got Jesuits, right? You've got Freemasons. You've got a Israeli lobby, you've got a Saudi lobby, you've got the Bilderbergs, you got the royal family, and so the Venetian black nobility, and so I kind of feel like it's a smorgasbord of elites, but ultimately it's the prince of the power of the air. And I guess my question is: so these people say that this group that runs the world is using the Bible as a blueprint to carry out all of these things, and I just view it as the inverse, that God sees everything, and he just matter-of-factly stated, look, this is what's going to happen ahead of time, which speaks to this supernatural aspect. Just thoughts on this, on people trying to sort of destroy this prophecy idea and say, oh, it's just they're following this plan that they've had since forever, and the Bible is their plan to carry everything out.
Right. Well, then I would point out again, when we look at the messianic prophecies that were fulfilled in the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth, those include the timing of his birth. So how are those things arranged? So many of these prophecies can't be arranged or carried out by any group of people trying to take them. So I believe what you're saying is true. God, he is omniscient. He foresees this. He isn't bound by time like we are. And he knows these things as a fact because they've already happened. And Ephesians 6:12 tells us that we're dealing with not against flesh and blood enemies here in this life, but against unseen powers and dark powers in this fallen world. And so, yes, all of these things, whatever different groups people are focused on, it's Satan controlling all of these groups that aren't born again Christian groups outside of the church, which I call the church as born again believers in Christ. It's not a building or an organization. Outside of that, everyone else is following false gods. And this is what Jesus says when he says, build your house upon the solid rock, not the shifting sand. Anything else that a person builds their life on apart from Jesus Christ is shifting sand. And so, yeah, Satan's behind all of that. He doesn't care how he deceives people from not following Christ. He doesn't care what group they follow or what philosophy they follow, as long as they don't give their lives to Jesus Christ.
I want to get your thoughts on Israel, given all that's going on. Netanyahu just came to the U.S. and met with Trump, effectively today. And reading some of your work, just is normal with anyone. I diverge on some of your assessments, Britt, but I think by and large we agree on most things. But no one is ever going to agree with everyone on every single thing, and I think we should, be able to put aside politely any differences. I think next week, in a week or two, I'm going to have Pastor Chuck Baldwin coming back on, who has strong diverging views on some points. But I wanted to bring up Israel, which I think is important, obviously. I haven't completely formulated my theology or opinion on what's going on there entirely. I've been to Israel. I had a wonderful time there some years back. And so on the one hand, I do see the return of Israel as a supernatural prophetic event, much of what you discuss. However, on the other, for example, I see the actions that the Israeli government is carrying out to be very not correct. And I feel like we can't give them a blank check to do what they're doing. And, for example, I think they are killing many innocent people, including Christians, in Gaza. For the moment, my way of sort of trying to square this circle is sort of to use the example of Israel being a disobedient child. Let's say, a teenager that's just gone crazy, that's trashing the house, but that the parent, is eventually going to severely discipline the child. And so on the one hand, we see this being a supernatural circumstance. It's being made a nation again. But on the other, they are still sinners. They've rejected Christ and the Messiah, and so they're acting, doing many terrible things. Just your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think that it is a supernatural event. Again, the Bible, God promised, he said, I'm going to bring my people from the exile among the nations, from north and south and east and west, back into the land. I'm going to make the nation of Israel a nation again in a single day. We read that in the book of Isaiah, and he says, who ever heard of such a thing happening? And we've seen that happen. So, yeah, again, people, we live in a fallen world. It doesn't mean that every action that is taken by Israel or the people who are in charge of the government of Israel is always perfect. But God has made it very clear in the scriptures that he stands with Israel. And again, Ephesians 6:12 tells us that we're not fighting flesh and blood enemies. There's these powers of darkness that are at play. So this is a spiritual struggle that we see going on. And no doubt about it, in my mind, that's exactly what we see happening. We've seen this, throughout history, with the Jewish people being targeted by Satan because of the Abrahamic covenant that was made in the Bible. So Satan sees if he can destroy the Jewish people, then he believes that makes God a liar, because God said, I will make your descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And he made this promise to Abraham. So I think that's what's at play. But again, we read in the Bible that God is on the side of Israel. Again, that doesn't mean that we have to agree with every action that's undertaken by Israel. But at the same time, if there's a fight between the right to exist of Israel, to take the opposite end of that is to be opposed to God. God said, once I plant my people back in the nation, they will never be uprooted again. As we stated before, Bible prophecy is 100% accurate. And so Israel is not going anywhere according to what the Bible tells us.
The third temple. So there's been a lot of talk about this third temple almost on a weekly basis. We see these Jewish groups and organizations talking about the construction of a third temple. I guess that would be another example of prophecy, because that's also mentioned that another temple would be built. Thoughts here?
Sure. Well, I would expect another temple to be built. I don't know exactly how that'll take place. But Jesus himself pointed out that one of the signs that will take place during the tribulation is something called the abomination of desolation, where we read this in other parts of the New Testament as well, that the Antichrist will come into the temple and declare himself to be God in the Holy of Holies. So for that to happen, there has to be a rebuilt temple. And again, I don't know how that'll happen, but Jesus made the statement that it would. So I would expect that in order for that to happen, the temple has to be rebuilt.
Yeah, and when we see preparations for that by groups themselves saying they have everything ready, but again, the problem is the Temple Mount. I've stood there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. I've seen different articles talk about they could build alongside the Dome of the Rock. They could build the third temple, so you would have both. Others just want to obliterate the Dome of the Rock. There's a fantastic documentary on the Shin Bet, and which talks about how in the 1990s, an extremist sectarian group of Israelis were going to attempt to blow up the Dome of the Rock, and the Shin Bet itself stopped them from doing that, because that would be very chaotic and could kick off a third world war. So as you say, there seems to be a movement towards that. How that's going to happen, I think we're all just going to have to wait and see. I guess to ask you then, if we have to go through hardship and tribulation, being digitally unpersoned, or whatever way, if it happens, whenever it happens, as you said, maybe it'll be in our old age, maybe it'll be in our children's generation, maybe it'll be within a few years. Whatever this hardship or tribulation looks like, thoughts on how to survive it. First of all, I know you've mentioned, it's just basic stuff, a little, prepping, maybe not to the extreme, but doing whatever people can. Just thoughts on how to survive difficult times.
Sure. Well, I believe that the tribulation, the 7-year tribulation written in the Bible, I hold the viewpoint of a pre-tribulation rapture of the church, which means that Jesus would return for the church, those who believe in him, born again Christians, before that tribulation takes place. So I think that Christians will not go through that tribulation, that judgment period, just as Noah entered the ark and didn't get flooded as the rest of the world was. That said, Jesus said that in this world we'll go through many trials and tribulations, many sorrows, but take heart, I've overcome the world. So putting our trust in Jesus is number one on that list. But there are a number of things. The Bible tells us that the prudent person foresees danger and takes appropriate action. And so looking around at whatever vulnerabilities we may have individually, how can you best shore those up? You want to make sure, well, what if water stopped coming out of my faucet? Where am I going to get it from? If the grocery stores no longer had food, the restaurants no longer had food, where's my food going to come from? Where's, shelter come from? And there are a lot of people that will stockpile supplies. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But again, that also, it shouldn't be where your faith is placed, because, hey, let's say you have 10 years worth of supplies and the crisis you're in, it lasts 11 years, you're going to run out. And what happens if you've got a big supply warehouse and it catches on fire, or people show up and steal it all? So placing your faith in those things, I think, leads to disappointment. I think the best thing people can do to prepare physically, just outside of the spiritual and coming to know Jesus, is develop relationships with your neighbors, the people around you, and develop skills and figure out how can I best serve those people around me. And if you're serving the people around you and you're in a group that's tight knit, that you can rely upon other people, that's the best way to survive a crisis situation. We see this throughout history in a number of places, most recently, like Zimbabwe and the hyperinflation. There's a whole book about that people can read. And the people who made it through that the best, who survived the best, were not lone wolves who had stores of gold and silver and food, but people who just had relationships with other people and people that they could rely on and depend on, because we weren't meant to be alone. We're social. We're meant to work with each other and support each other.
That is excellent advice. And lately, I ask many guests this question, and I think that is most important: community. And I don't think the whole stocking up is the best way to go. Again, there's no way you can protect it from everything, from, as you mentioned, natural disaster, from a horde of people. And it's just best to have relationships. And of course, the solution ultimately being the metaphysical one, the spiritual one, right? So we've covered, I think we've gotten a great broad, for your first time on the podcast, download of your analysis, and very interesting. And I'd say I'd agree with it in large part. But nobody knows exactly how things are going to unfold, and that's going to be the fun of it. Grab your popcorn, enjoy the show, as I like to jokingly say. Is there any other thought, something we haven't covered that you think is important, or any final thought for us?
No, I think that's probably about it. I mean, again, we see all of these things in the world, and I believe the reason we're seeing them is because Jesus is coming back. Jesus said the time right before his coming would be like a woman having birth pains. And so that means we would see these great global upheavals that we're seeing, such as we're seeing in the financial markets now, such as we saw with the pandemic 5 years ago. I would expect these types of global events to be more severe and closer together as we approach the return of Jesus Christ. And so the most important thing anybody can do is to give their life to Christ, because, as the Bible says, we're all sinners. That just means we've fallen short of God's mark of perfection. And the Bible says the wages of sin is death. And so that means our destiny is to be eternally separated from a holy God. But the good news, the Bible tells us, is that while we were still sinners, Jesus Christ came to earth. He lived a perfect, sinless life, and he died on the cross. He shed his blood as payment for our sins. He paid the price. He paid the penalty for us so that we could be reconciled with God and have eternal life. That's the most important thing you can ever do in your life, is to come to know Jesus. So guys, I would encourage anybody out there, again, we've got a free book called Coming to Jesus. It's on Amazon. It's on Apple iBooks. It's on Google Play, anywhere ebooks can be found. You can go read about the journey that I undertook to discover Jesus and how it transformed my life, and go down that journey if you haven't already. I don't think you will be disappointed. All
right. And where's the best place to find you? Again, the links are in the description, but I believe primarily it's your Substack these days.
Yeah, Substack is the central place where I'm located, brittgillette.substack.com. That's where you'll find all my videos, all my articles. Pretty much anything I'm doing is going to be linked on there.
And you have the paid option as well, where you do, I think, live Q&A and some content that's behind the paywall, yeah?
Sure, yes. Yeah, we do regular Saturday videos that are behind the paywall as well. But then if anybody wants that and they can't afford it, just send me a message on Substack and I'll be more than happy to gift that to you. We don't want anybody to miss out on the paid content due to financial reasons. So that's how we support our family. So that's why we have it to begin with. But yes, we do a live Q&A monthly. We're hoping to roll out some additional features as well as a thank you to all of our paid subscribers.
All right. Well, keep up the great work, Britt, hopefully we talk again, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.